Welcome to another episode of BS Bible Study with Deborah. In the last episode, we talked about the God in Genesis 1 being different from the God in Genesis 2. And, the conversation out there has been pretty interesting, and I'm actually enjoying it because I'm forcing people to look twice at some things that they've always taken for granted. I think it's a mind that is strong, that the Lord has strengthened, that is able to look at some of these deficiencies written by man and acknowledge that they are deficient, yet not losing their faith, because that is a sign of strength from the Lord. That is a sign of revelation. That is a sign of wisdom. You are not questioning just to question and say, oh, rubbish, to hell with it. You're questioning, you're looking, you're searching just to understand why the people who compiled the Bible, left out certain things. And you're trying to piece together the narrative that forms the Bible that we believe in and we carry. And if you're objective, you'll know that there are some parts of the Bible that do not make sense. It doesn't mean it's God that made it not to make sense. Okay, it is man that made it not to make sense, not God. Okay, so the Lord took the man. I'm talking about the Lord in Genesis 2 now, and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord commanded the man. You see, the God in Genesis 1, there were no commands. It was like, God, you can have this, you can eat that. No restrictions, nothing at all. Whether it's the things that came from the sea or things that came from the sky or the earth, no restrictions. All those trees and everything, no restrictions. Now here we have the singular God. Remember we said the God in Genesis 1 was he was with a plurality of people. Now some people say it's the sons of God. I put it to you, he was talking to, some call her a consort, some call her a goddess. And I think she was probably Asherah, Astarte. Don't shoot me, okay? We shall see when you read the epic of Gilgamesh or some of the Sumerian texts, okay? You will see that, and in fact, scattered throughout the Bible. Do you notice that, especially the Old Testament, wherever the Lord punished the Israelites, it was when they disobeyed his instructions not to go after other gods. And the common gods that are often mentioned are Baal and his consort Asherah. Okay, Asherah is known by several names from, right from the Sumerian times. Istat, Astarte, Asherah, her name just kept changing, okay? And constantly the Lord will say, like destroy the place of worship of Baal, and please do not mount the Asherah poles. And when the people sinned, that's precisely what they did, and then the Lord punished them. So even the Bible recognizes that there is a goddess called Asherah. Okay, there are other gods, Chemosh. Okay, there's Dagon and the other gods that they all worshipped. All right. So the Lord said, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This God sounds very, very strict compared to the other God that said, just have your stuff. But you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. Why wouldn't a loving God want you to know good from evil? Why should you die just in your quest for knowing good and evil? Please pause and just think about that before you crucify me, okay? Why should you die for wanting to know good and evil? Anyway, the Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. You see that? This singular God, he first created Adam in Genesis 2 verse 7. It says, then the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed his life, blah, blah, blah. And he continued, not until verse 18 did he decide, oops, this man will be lonely and it's not good for him to be lonely. Let me just find him a partner, okay? Then the Lord God said, it's not good for the man, not for a man, for the man that he created to be alone. I, not we, not let us, I will make a helper suitable for him. Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky. I didn't know that, actually. This God in Genesis 2 had formed all these things out of the ground, just like Adam that he formed. The God in Genesis 1 created by his voice, by a decree, by speech, by sound. He called things into being. This God created them from material, from dust, okay? All the animals and everything else he created, including man. And then after a while, oops, as an afterthought, oh, let's create a consort for Adam. So ladies and gentlemen, I put it to you that Eve was an afterthought with this God in Genesis 2. Eve was an afterthought. She wasn't created same time as Adam, as the man in Genesis 1. Okay? Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals, blah, blah, and he brought them to the man to see what he would name them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that was his name. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. So in fact, Eve was created here to help Adam. Okay? She was, first of all, she was an afterthought. And second of all, she was created to help Adam. So the Lord caused the Lord God caused the man he created out of dust to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs. Now I've heard people say, well, it wasn't a literal rib. In another translation, that he took from the side of Adam that he had created. Well, even if it wasn't a rib, Eve was not created from dust, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just shock you. She was not created from dust. Whether it was the rib that was taken, because the rib is not the same as dust. This God in Genesis 2 had already formed man. So whether it was the rib or he cut Adam into two, whatever he did, Eve was not created out of dust. She was created out of a living and breathing being. And she was an afterthought, okay? And her role was to come and help Adam. Not that she had any sort of distinct, unlike the first creation where they were created together. So everything was given to them together. You can see that in this one, Adam was even given the privilege of naming all the creatures and everything, and whatever he named them stood. So even Eve had no say in what a bird was called or whatever was called in this creation of Genesis 2. Okay? Right. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, okay, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. Fine. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib. We've just said it, well, whether it was a rib or flesh or meat or whatever it was, she was not created from dust. She was an afterthought. She even had no say in naming any of those things that were created before her. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. Meaning he took her away somewhere, carved her into, shaped her into whatever he wanted to shape her into, and then brought her back. Okay? Adam didn't just wake up from his sleep and, oops, who's this beauty here beside me? No, this Lord in Genesis 2 took her away somewhere, made her the way he wanted to make her, and then brought her to Adam. Okay? The man said, now this is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. You see, he didn't say this is now dust of my dust and sand of my sand, or God knows what. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. So he named everything, the animals, the this, the that, including Eve. He said she shall be called or described as a woman. Okay? That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. That's such an odd statement there. Where did the marriage take place that, that statement fitted in there? I don't know. I'm still studying it. Adam and his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. When did they get married? I mean, it didn't say. Just bringing her to him to help doesn't translate into a marriage. A helper could be, yes, your wife could be, your housemaid could be your relative, could, a neighbor could help you if they think you're lonely and alone. Anyway. So, ladies and gentlemen, I entreat you to put off your blinkers and, just study the Bible. The answers to some of the missing questions are in the Bible. I know I've read other texts, okay, but I'm not going to other texts. I'm just trying to reason with the language of the Bible. And one of my good help I get is from reading the Hebrew Bible, because when you read the Bible in its original language, you will see how, a lot of one word can just change the context and the meaning of something. So it's important that you understand. For instance, that there are words in my native tongue that, and, I want to say I speak a fairly decent English. But there are words in my native tongue that I struggle to find the English words that capture them. And at best, I would just, put just a replacement word, but it doesn't quite capture what I mean. But when I'm talking to someone who understands my dialect, they will know precisely what I mean. So, it's good to study the Bible, it's good to read it, and it's good to understand it in its original context. Thank you for listening. I shall be back where we shall be talking about the curse that was given by this God in Genesis 2. Because God in Genesis 1 did his own creation, something catastrophic, cataclysmic must have happened between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. And in fact, just before Genesis 1, another catastrophe had happened, and so the Spirit was hovering, trying to, restart, recreate the earth, which happened with that team, that God that, he referred to his companions as us, and let us create in our image. Compare that to the God in Genesis 1 who is alone, who created with stiff, strict conditions. Don't do this, don't. And, the God in Genesis 1 created man and woman in their image. Okay, so I believe I'm the image of God, my husband, my sons, my daughter, we're all images of God. But this God in Genesis 2, well, he just created man from dust alone. There was no us there was no this, and then he created all the other stuff, and then, oops, okay, I'll create somebody to help him. And then as an afterthought, he created Eve, and he took her, went, molded her somewhere. Eve was not from dust, okay? He breathed his life and his essence into his creation, and then he took out of that creation, so she was not dust, okay? And then he gave strict rules. Don't eat this, and don't eat that, and don't eat this. We shall cover that when I return. Thank you for listening.